Hello and welcome to the Insight in 15, KPMG's flagship podcast for business leaders. I'm Stuart Burt, and today I'm joined virtually by my colleague Richard Andrews, who leads on sustainability for KPMG in the UK, who is over 4,000 miles away in the Amazonian city of Belém in Brazil, attending the UN Climate Change Conference, COP30. We're going to get to the heart of what the key issues are at the conference and what it all means for business. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Brilliant. Great to be here, Stuart. Good to see you.
Great. We've got 15 minutes, so let's get straight to it. Now, COP30 was meant to be a big one. Comes at a moment key to the whole process, 10 years after the Paris Agreement set climate goals and just 5 years before the 2030 targets kick in. It's fair to say there has been a big question mark around over what we can expect from this COP. What's the feeling on the ground so far, and why should business be listening to what's happening at the conference?
At Paris, we were on track for a 4 or 5 degrees temperature increase. That has come down on the latest predictions to 2.5, 2.6 degrees. So a huge amount of progress has already been made in a 10-year period. But there's a lot more to go, and we are on track to miss the 1.5 degree target. In fact, I think it's been said last year was the first year on record where we were on average over 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels for the year. And I think it's fair to say that there has been something of a geopolitical shift in recent years. And that is true, but also companies are looking at sustainability differently. So I think the famous quote is, "It's the economy, stupid." And one of the key focus areas that I'm seeing here at this COP in particular is the opportunities and the risks that arise from sustainability and climate. So we hosted a session yesterday morning with a bunch of financial services organisations, and that reminded us very clearly right at the outset that the economic argument for sustainability is really clear, and that companies are recognizing and, if anything, shifting from an impact-driven agenda into one that is really focused on the economic drivers and the economic opportunity. And we've also heard at this COP a lot on a shift from ideas to action, from policy to delivery. There's also been a really key shift in the conversation around the role of insurers. I think the insurance industry will increasingly act, if I like it, as a warning signal to capital markets. Some of the climate risks that are now happening are making things uninsurable. And if something isn't insurable, it's not investable. And we're already starting to see that drive action and capital reallocations.
Now, last week, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer did say that the consensus has gone on tackling climate change. So given that, looking ahead to the end of COP, do you expect that we'll see any new commitments made at this conference and real action that comes out of it?
I think you've snuck 3 questions into one there. So firstly, the question of consensus. It might not be 100% consensus anymore. But the majority of countries are looking to move ahead. I think over 80% of the world's economies are represented here. I think your second question was around new commitments. So the COP presidency publicly has stated they're not looking to reopen the climate finance commitments that were made last year at Baku. But they want to focus on how countries are meeting those commitments, and also the really important question of how do you crowd in private finance. However, that isn't to say that we won't see new things coming out of this COP. The Brazilian presidency has over 30 priority areas. It's a really ambitious agenda. There's been a real focus on integrating nature and biodiversity. And one of the ideas was to use the Brazilian rainforest as kind of the living metaphor of the codependency between climate and nature. And one of the big initiatives is the Tropical Forest Forever initiative, and the facility initiative that the Brazilian presidency is driving forward with the World Bank. And then I think your third question was, is there any real progress? Well, actually, in some way, that's going to be recognised over decades as we look back on the impact of this COP. and possibly as the trialogue of COPs that this is bringing to an end, and the role of multilateral dialogue and agreement to drive things forward. But as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, there's real energy in making difference on the ground, and we're seeing a huge amount of innovation driving things forward in the private sector. So, in short, I think that demonstrates actually we are seeing change happen right now on the ground.
Last week, the UN Secretary General said that we'd effectively missed the pathway to keeping warming below 1.5 degrees. So in practical terms, both for the environment and for business, what does slipping off that pathway actually mean in practice?
Yeah, well, I think for the environment, in terms of missing the pathway, we expect to see more extreme events more often. So we expect to see more hurricanes. We expect to see more heat events. We're also going to see something of a snowball effect. So you'll often hear people talking about tipping points. So as you hit those tipping points, actually, it accelerates some of the negative effects of climate change. And that's one thing that we've started to talk about in terms of, well, how are people's transition plans modelling those? How are they thinking about those? Because that could radically shift how quickly people need to take action. And by that, I don't necessarily just mean mitigating the climate change itself, but it's really adapting to cope with the climate change that's already here. So what does that mean for business? Well, I think they need to be thinking about what the impacts of climate change are already, and those accelerating climate changes are for their businesses, whether it is looking at their factories and their plants, what's the flood risk, how do they cope in heat, in thinking about their insurability. I was talking to a client again a few weeks ago about a big project that they were looking to do, and they ran the scenario models and talked to the insurers, and they were going to put infrastructure in for homes that would be underwater in 20 years' time. The economic case for that investment fell apart, and the project didn't go ahead. And then supply chains. Supply chains are going to be a huge part of this. And some of that is fundamentally the impact that rising temperatures have on the crops that we depend on. And we've actually seen it this year on cocoa. You've seen a number of what we used to call chocolate bars are no longer called chocolate bars because the cocoa contents come down. Why? Because there's a massive reduction in the yield of cocoa crops, which is pushing those prices up. So companies will need to build that into their climate scenario modeling, into their risk assessments, think about where their physical locations are, but also think through those dependencies in their supply chains. Do they need to source things from other regions? Do they need to switch some of the raw material that they're building in to their processes and development of their products? And just one other thing, and I guess in the UK, we are quite a service-driven economy. But actually, some of these impacts will also flow through into the wider economic impact as it impacts the jobs people have and the salaries that they're paid. So something like the entertainment industry, really dependent on clients or their customers' spending power. And if their discretionary spend goes down, whether that is because incomes fall or because the cost of essentials goes up, actually that has a direct impact for the service industry as well as other parts of the economy. So action, I think companies need to be thinking about their business models. They need to be thinking about what adaptation they need to be doing at the moment. They need to think about what incentives there are to decarbonise, but also where are the commercial benefits of that. And for many companies, actually, there's a positive to this as well, in terms of thinking through where are the new opportunities that a decarbonised economy might mean for them and for their businesses.
Great. So if we take a step back for a moment, what is the real state of play in the business world in terms of what is actually being done by business? There's been plenty of scrutiny around greenwashing. It's becoming a bit more of a political issue. Is meaningful progress happening on the ground beneath all that noise?
What we are seeing is companies taking that greenwashing risk increasingly seriously and thinking about what are they committed to and how do they meet those commitments. And I'm really encouraged actually in seeing what I call a growing maturity in the role of sustainability within businesses. So it is becoming a whole of board or a whole of executive committee issue. We're seeing sustainability embedded into all of the service lines and support functions. So it isn't just an issue for the sustainability team. This is a whole of business issue because actually that's where it will make the biggest difference. The CFO, the COO, the business leaders are really interested in actually what are the opportunities and what are the risks that this means for me. And transition plans are going to be one of the key tools that businesses are using around that. We could call it a business survival plan and strategy. They explain how businesses are thinking about their risks to changing climate, changing nature, how they are facing into that as a communication tool, both externally and internally, but also importantly, how they're using those transition plans to really think about their strategy. Arguably, every business needs one, but actually, I was at an event this morning with a number of financial services companies. So one bank was talking about actually how their customers are thinking about the transition and the exposure of their business to climate risks. Actually will either tick up or tick down the cost of finance. And that is a real impact on companies and will be an incentive for them to make the change that they need to. Transition plans need to be credible, but they also help companies become much more investable.
Great. Now, to take it to the practical steps that businesses need to take, do you have any tips as to kind of what the priority steps businesses should be taking on climate action straight away?
So for businesses setting out, I think one key thing is to think about what are they doing on their transition plans and starting that transition planning journey. I think there's a mindset piece around that. So they're not simply a compliance exercise, but they are actually a framework to think about how a company will harness the commercial opportunities and address the commercial risks that climate change bring. There's also a piece on how you embed this into company goals and targets, but also compensation plans. So it won't be all of the compensation plan, but I think there is an important thing in terms of linking your targets through to compensation and how that then helps drive behaviours to embrace the action that needs to be taken.
Great. We're almost out of time, so I'm going to move to our final question, which is the question we always end on, which is what's the single most important thing businesses should be taking away from this COP?
I think my big takeaway for businesses are the challenges for climate, for nature, and for people are not going away on their own. They're here, they're real, and companies need to lean in and think about what they mean for them. That means they need to understand the risks to their businesses and take steps to adapt, to change, and to mitigate those risks. And it means they need to think about the opportunities that this brings to their businesses, where they can be successful in the future. Go back to that quote that we heard yesterday morning. The economic case for climate change and for sustainable business is clear. Businesses need to be taking the actions to lean into that. And those that do will be those that succeed in the long term.
Richard, thank you very much for taking time out your busy conference diary to share your insights and enjoy the Brazilian sunshine while you can before you come back to quite a drizzly UK. That's it for today. For those watching or listening to the podcast, as ever, please do like and subscribe on all major platforms, and we will see you next time for the Insight in 15.